Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started in just a moment. We're allowing all our special guests into the Zoom room. All right, this event will be recorded and we will get started. So welcome to the School of Education, Dr. Penny L. Hamrick Doctoral Student Colloquium Series. My name is Jamina Williams, and I'm the Director of Student Services within the School of Education, and I will be our moderator for this evening's event. We are so pleased to welcome all of our virtual attendees, including School of Education faculty, staff, students, alumni, university, and the university body at large, community members, and partner associations, among others. The Colloquium Series offers School of Education doctoral students and alumni an opportunity to share their original research and learn from their peers, faculty, and staff. Each month, one EDD and one PhD student presents their research at the Colloquium. These sessions helped our doctoral students to connect with each other and develop a peer community that is invaluable in supporting their journeys in the program. Each doctoral or alumni presenter is also asked to write a research brief that relates to their presentation, which is then included and edited in a publication titled Doctoral Student Research Briefs, which is published on the School of Education's website. The research brief is a way to disseminate our doctoral students' research as shared in the Colloquium in a concise format with relevance to education. So this evening, each presenter will be provided 20 minutes to share their research, and then we'll move on to questions and answers following each presentation. Please save your questions for the end, and you're welcome to type your questions in the chat area of the Zoom, or you can use your mic to ask a question. I'm going to admit some more of our guests in. And so tonight, our first presenter is Dr. Mike Barret, who is an alum of our EDD program in the School of Education. Dr. Barret has over 15 years of experience working with refugee youth, specializing in trauma-informed and culturally responsive education. His research focuses on managing transgenerational trauma through schooling, with a particular interest in the role of cultural identity in supporting academic resilience among migrant students. Dr. Barret has led trainings on trauma-informed teaching practices and coached educators in international settings, including China, Thailand, and Myanmar, which is also known as Burma. He currently works for the International Rescue Committee in New York City. He holds an EDD with a concentration in global and international education and is passionate about using education as a tool for empowerment and resilience for youth impacted by conflict and disaster. The title of Dr. Barrett's presentation is Managing Transgenerational Trauma Through Schooling, the Case of Migrant Karen Students Along the Thai-Myanmar Border. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Barret for his presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Right, thank you so much for the introduction. And let me go ahead and share my screen. And we'll go full. All right. Well, thank you all for joining today and allowing me the space and opportunity to speak. Again, my name is Mike Barret, and I'm here to talk about how ethnic Karen students along the Thai-Myanmar border are managing their war-based trauma. So I want to start off by providing some context for the challenges that are faced by this specific ethnic group in Myanmar. And again, Myanmar is also referred to as Burma, so you may hear me refer to it either way. But the country itself is home to a large range of ethnic groups, about 135 in total. My study focused on one specific ethnic minority known as the Karen. They make up about 7% of the country's population. And ever since Burma was decolonized back in the 1940s, it's really been defined by ethnopolitical conflict. This was really the result of the military's efforts to try and Burmanize the country, where they have worked quite hard to create a singular national identity. And of course, that's at the expense of the ethnic minorities. This policy of Burmanization has effectively resulted in ethnocide, and the military continues to attempt to suppress cultural and linguistic diversity today. This conflict has been going on for over 70 years in Myanmar, and the consequences have been huge for the Karen people. Today, there are about 700,000 people who are internally displaced within the country, but over the decades of war, there have been millions of Karen people who've had to flee, usually to Thailand. And this displacement has significantly impacted the education system and overall opportunities for all Karen children. This background hopefully helps you to understand a little bit about the conflict, since it really is central to understanding why education for the Karen community has been so fractured and so inconsistent for so long. So if I build on that initial context for you of the ethno-political conflict, we can start looking at how it's really shaped education in the Karen community. Since the 1940s, the military's directly targeted schools run by ethnic minority groups. They've sought to destroy them however possible. This, of course, then causes many disruptions to education and educational access for students of the ethnic minorities like the Karen. As a result, though, alternative education models started to emerge. There are a lot of village-run Karen migrant schools or Karen schools that are run by the small villages. There are what's known as migrant learning centers that we're going to look closely at today. And there's also schools within refugee camps in Thailand that students can attend. These new educational models really reflect the grassroots efforts that the Karen community has taken on to keep education alive, even when there's no end in sight for this war that has been going on for so long. In 2012, there was a ceasefire that was signed, and that gave some hope to the ethnic minorities of the country. Um, there, there was a brand new democratically elected government, and there started to be education reforms. The government schools were much more inclusive. They were working towards allowing ethnic minorities to practice their language in schools and learn about their cultures. But that ceasefire only lasted 9 years, and in 2021, there was another military coup. So all of those education reforms went out the door and everything went back to the way it was prior to that ceasefire. The graphic that you can see over on the right here shows some of um, these schooling options that are available to the students. And we're going to be looking at the migrant learning centers today. They are based in Thailand. They're on the Thai side of the border. And there is a fee to attend these schools. The students pay about $300 a year to attend. The school, however, is very much cultural based, and everything they do is rooted in Karen culture. And of course, it provides safety. It's outside the war zone, they're on the other side of the border. So there is a good sense of security for the students who attend here. As a result, this has become a really viable option for many students who want to continue their education in a safe place. And many students are crossing the border into Thailand to attend these schools. So now that you have all that background of education in the Karen community, we can take a look at the specific location where I did my research. It's known as Thumaki. It's a migrant learning center in the very small town of Pok Pra, Thailand. On the map here, you can see this is where the school is located. It's about 20 minutes from the border, so it's easily accessible for students once they cross into Thailand to reach the school and attend classes. The Learning Center itself is completely independent, and it's become really well known for the Karen community. They have a full K-12 program as well as 3 bachelor's degrees, and all instruction is taught in the native Korean language with the introduction of English as the students begin to get older. They currently have over 700 students enrolled, and each year this school has been growing, especially since the coup, once more students were crossing over into Thailand. There are a couple downsides to migrant learning centers, though. The Thai government and the Myanmar government do not recognize these schools. They are not certified in any way. So as students graduate, it does create some hurdles when they go to apply to a university or apply for a job, and their credential might not be up to par with what people are looking for. The school, however, has worked really hard to mitigate this, and they've partnered with a few universities around the world to create a pathway for the students, and they created their own bachelor's degree programs as well. So despite limitations like this center really plays a critical role in the education of hundreds of Korean youth every year. My study really developed around a central research question, and you can see it here. The question's designed to guide the study by establishing resilience theory as the lens that we can use to better understand the educational experiences of Korean migrants. And to give a very brief overview of resilience theory, the chart on the right is adapted from the work of Michael Ungar. He's a resilience expert, and he pays particular attention to how resilience occurs in different cultures. And what you see on these outer rings are the 7 tensions that he indicates must be explored when looking to understand resilience in a non-Western context. So my study takes place in a non-Western setting, so I used this framework to really analyze and understand the data that I collected. And to give you an idea of what that data was, you can see here the um, the research itself was grounded in case study methodology, and I was looking to build a case around the experiences of the students in particular, but I also wanted to bring in staff from the school to provide their experiences and their observations of the students as well. I was able to recruit 10 Korean migrant students. They were all in their final year at this particular learning center. And for my study, they all participated in a survey. They each participated in an individual interview with me, and 5 of those 10 students then participated in a focus group at the very end of the study. I was also able to hold a focus group with the 4 teachers that I recruited and a one-on-one interview with the school leader. We know that case study research really requires the use of varying data collection methods in order to build that case. And by including the teachers and administrator, I was able to really build a stronger case in the end. So I'd like to introduce the 3 key themes that emerged from my research. These themes build on each other to show the progression of the students' experiences over time at the Learning Center. It all begins with meeting their basic needs, which gives that foundation that's necessary for students to be able to focus on education and then ultimately maintain their cultural resilience. When their basic needs are met, education then becomes a bridge. It connects the students' identities to their aspirations, and it allows them to envision a future beyond their immediate challenges. And then finally, the journey culminates in the students' contributions to their communities, where they move from focusing solely on their families to making a broader impact within the Korean community. So we're going to take a closer look at each of these now. The first theme, again, indicates this idea of stability and how important it is for the students to have their basic needs met. Consistency that the center offered these students was something that the other schooling options we looked at earlier are not always able to promise. They're just not set up for that kind of consistency. The participants that I talked to talked about consistent meals, that they had shelter and a consistent bed to go home to every night. They had a sense of safety since they are on the Thai side of the border and they felt more protected there than they did on the Myanmar side of the border. As the students began to feel safe for essentially the first time in their lives, they were able to finally let their guard down. And this then opened up opportunities to give more attention to other things of importance, like understanding and furthering Korean culture. And I do think it's important to realize that the students at this school are still very much connected to the war through their friends and their family, and especially Facebook. They're seeing what's happening every day in Myanmar, but they're now able to view the war and the conflict from the outside so they can consider its impact without experiencing it firsthand. There's a quote in the corner there from one of the participants, Sarah Moo, and he shows his appreciation for the consistency that the schools provided for him. He doesn't have to worry the same way that his parents do. The students repeatedly expressed how important it was for them to have the consistency that the school provided. They've experienced fear, poverty, war, and by being able to attend this school, they've seen that their lives can change. It doesn't have to be that. They shared with me how deeply inspired they were to make change in the Korean community, especially in the future. As we move on from that first theme to the second, we see that meeting basic needs provided the foundation for Korean students to feel culturally grounded and secure. It allowed them to focus on education. With their needs met, schooling then became the bridge to connect their strong sense of identity to their future aspirations. It empowered them to envision and pursue broader goals into their future. These migrant learning centers are more than just a place for academic learning. They've become a space where the students can reconnect with their cultural identity, something that was nearly impossible in the schooling methods in Myanmar, where they are legally not allowed to teach their ethnic culture. Here, the students talk about how they can embrace their heritage and their language, how they can participate in Korean traditions that they weren't able to back home. It gives them a sense of belonging. By strengthening their cultural identity, the Learning Center then enabled them to see beyond their individual struggles and recognize the potential they had to contribute to the wider Korean community. You can see another quote here from a participant, Dodo, and he shares his dream of returning to the Korean state to support students through training and through education. This transformation shows how schooling becomes a bridge for the students between their identity and their future goals. It's empowering to them to not only grow personally, but to also grow so they can impact their entire community. The final theme that emerged from my study explores the worldview transformation that Korean students talk about. Their entire worldview changed from attending this school. The participants all indicated to me that they initially focused on supporting their immediate families when they began at the school. They wanted to make their families proud. But after being at the school for years, their worldview expanded and they felt stronger motivation to support the entire Korean community, not just their immediate family. After they experienced armed conflict, displacement, the participants felt that supporting their immediate family back in the Korean state was still a priority, but that they were able to go beyond that as well. It was revealed through the data that I collected that the experiences of the students at the Migrant Learning Center began to change as their worldview began to broaden. Through their education and their exposure to a wider community, peers, mentors at the school, the students started seeing themselves as part of something bigger. They formed connections with other Korean youth and began to understand the challenges faced by the entire Korean community. This expanded view then led to a shift in motivation. One student, you can see here, described how her family faced ongoing violence and displacement from the Burmese military, and it underscores the shared experience of struggle that so many Korean students went through. This shared struggle then fostered a sense of unity and drive to support not only their families, but the larger community. Um, so to conclude, education's not just about personal growth for these students, it's about survival, resilience, and ultimately contributing back to their community. The transformative power of education lies in its ability to give displaced students the tools they need to envision a better future, not just for themselves, but for those around them as well. And with that, I want to leave you with one final quote from one of the participants at Thought 2, who said, "I will make my community know about Korean history and language. I don't want the military to erase my people. I will return to my village and make a difference." And with that, I would love to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barrett, for that wonderful presentation. We really appreciate that. So yes, we would like to open it up for questions. If you guys have questions, you can enter them into the chat, or you can unmute your mic and ask your question. But Dr. Barrett, that was a wonderful presentation, and we appreciate your research and for you shedding light on such an important social issue. So thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And I have a question if there's no other questions at the moment. Can you share, I guess, what brought you or what led you to do this type of research for this specific population? Because it is such an important social issue, and I was not aware of the conflict and the issues in this region. So what led you to do research on this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I 15 years ago was not aware of the situation either. I couldn't even find Myanmar on a map 15 years ago. But through volunteer work and through work in the city of Philadelphia, I was able to get to know a number of Korean families and learn about their struggles, learn about their incredible resilience. And it's really stuck with me and just inspired me to make sure other people know about what's happening in Burma and to make sure that the students' voices are heard and that they are being supported in the way they need to be.
Thank you. Dr. Hill has a question.
Hi, Dr. Barrett. It was a fantastic presentation. And I know you're
Thank you.
presenting. I heard you presented at the for the Regional Asian Studies Conference. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're disseminating your work and what your plan is moving forward?
Absolutely. So I was able to actually stay in contact with this school for since I left, and they were really interested in hearing about what came from my study. So I was able to share the results with them. And my next steps now, I'm actually looking at continuing with this school and exploring the students who are there, but taking on more of a gendered lens to understand the differences that female students versus male students experience, because there were some discrepancies that came out that were gender-based as I started doing my analysis.
That's fantastic. Well, we look forward to following your evolution as you continue to work with the school, which is awesome, and then present your findings. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions for Dr. Barrett? right, well, thank you again so much for that wonderful presentation. We are going to switch gears and we're going to move to our second presenter for the evening. So we have Dr. Sara Steinman here, who is also an EDD alum from the School of Education. Dr. Steinman is a recent graduate within our EDD program where she focused her research on transgender athletes in college sports. Dr. Steinman has over 15 years of college athletic administration experience at various institutions and currently works for the Ivy League Conference Office in Championships in Sports Administration. Dr. Steinman's presentation is titled Exploring the Attitudes and Perceptions of Head Coaches Toward Transgender Athletes in Women's College Sports Before and After Intervention, a Phenomenological Study. So that sounds super interesting, and I can't wait to hear your presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Steinman. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you to everyone here for this presentation. So just a little bit of background about my research. When we think about trans athletes in sports, we often think of it as a new issue. However, there have been policies in place for trans athletes to participate in sports since the early 2000s. And the first openly transgender athlete participated in women's professional tennis in 1977. So it's hitting the mainstream through politics and media, which has led to a rise in attention. Since 2020, half the country have passed anti-trans bills into law that directly affect interscholastic and collegiate sports. And while from a society perspective, we're seeing greater levels of positive visibility and acceptance, we're not seeing that translate into sports. In fact, Americans' views are decreasing in recent years for supporting transgender athlete participation consistent with gender identity. So I did a qualitative phenomenological research study to explore the attitudes and perceptions of head coaches towards trans athletes in women's college sports before and after educational or exposure interventions. So my education, for both interventions, the educational and exposure intervention, I worked with an advocacy group called Athlete Ally. Half of my participants, the educational intervention was educational training led by professional staff at Athlete Ally, and the exposure intervention was hosted by Athlete Ally, but was led by, was a panel discussion led by transgender athletes who either currently or formerly have participated in a range of college sports. So just a little bit more about the background of my research. At its core, policies continue to remain inconsistent and can be restrictive or invasive, which obviously has an influence on participation rates and overall experience within participation. I mentioned this before, while public attitudes are generally increasing in support for transgender people in our society, they continue to be negative towards transgender athletes, particularly transgender women who seek the opportunity to participate in women's sports. And because of that, barriers persist as a result of social stigma and discrimination. I really focused my research in the women's sports space. There's significance to women's sports being deemed a protected class, and this tends to be a one-sided issue, focusing specifically on women's sports and transgender women, so individuals who were assigned male at birth and identify as women. So that was the focus of my study. I identified 3 research questions. What are the perceptions and attitudes of women's sport head coaches towards transgender athlete participation in women's college sports? how do select interventions impact the perceptions and attitudes of women's sport head coaches towards transgender athletes in women's college sports? And how do women's sport head coaches develop inclusive team cultures for transgender athletes in women's college sports? So I really looked at how this study really focused on attitudes and perceptions. So I looked at how do individuals form knowledge, how do they use prior experience to influence and develop attitudes and perceptions, and how does that translate externally to specific meaning. I use the critical theory lens in the fact that social bias shapes the way individuals understand the world, and we each show up with unique perspectives, and that recognizing that from that prior experiences can really develop into knowledge and varying facets that and focusing on a social change here from 3 levels of an individual personal level with shifting mental models, from an organizational level, really looking at policy development, and then holistically from a societal level. So I organized, when I focused my literature, really looking at the role of gender and the history of women's sport and how that influences attitudes and perceptions towards trans athletes, looking at, specifically at the evolution of policy, and then really honing in on team culture to help better understand my third research question. So the way my qualitative study worked, I conducted an initial individual interview with all of my participants. Then they were assigned to an intervention based on convenience and availability for most of the participants. For those participants that were available for both, they were selected to participate in a specific intervention. And then following that participation, I did another round of interviews with all of my participants. So as you can imagine, I had an exorbitant amount of data that needed to be collected, coded, and analyzed. And while the intervention was really important, it wasn't the focal point of my study. I really looked, the main focus was on the attitudes and perceptions of individuals towards trans athletes. And then are there, what could the interventions lead to any shifts in these attitudes and perceptions? So I had 20 total participants. So I conducted 40 interviews. All of them identified as cisgender. So if they were assigned, whatever they were assigned at birth, that's how they identify now. There were 10 men and 10 women with a wide age range. While more than half of my participants came from the Northeast, I I was surprised by the geographic variability that I was able to get with at least one representative from each of the geographic regions, how they were defined. And I didn't focus specifically on the importance of team sport versus individual sport. I did take this into account. And I had 11 individual sport coaches and 9 team sport coaches. So after all of several rounds of coding, several themes emerged. The first was around fairness, and really the paradox of fairness. I had participants tell me when asking holistically about what does fairness in sports mean to them. Tell me that really sports aren't fair. They're designed not to be fair. We have a winner and a loser, one team or one individual better than another, and that is just part of sports. And then on another hand, tell me that, well, transgender athlete participation isn't fair. There was a hyper focus around physiology and the physical advantage of transgender athletes. And then the case of Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas is a former swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania. This theme really, this sub-theme really focused on how important or the influence of winning. Leah Thomas was a very successful swimmer when she swam on the women's team, and when trans athletes win, that's when it becomes unfair. Looking at the gendered space of sports, men's sport as the standard. So women's sport was always trying to catch up to men's sport, which creates a little bit of women's sport as inferior to men's sport, which influences the way people formulated attitudes and perceptions. Again, there was a major focus on physiological differences between men and women, and kind of going back to the way we form our attitudes and perceptions, because a lot of the participants hadn't had previous interaction with transgender athletes specifically. They were drawing on experiences that they've had with cisgender individuals of the opposite sex. So particularly making comparisons to cisgender men to formulate their opinions about trans athletes, trans women. 80% of the participants agreed that this is a very confusing, complicated, and contentious topic. There was a fear around publicly having conversation for being either ostracized or judged based on viewpoints, or quote unquote being canceled if they didn't support trans athletes. So there was a lot of feeling and emotion, but this kind of tension of it's not necessarily safe to talk about and share honest opinions, which leads to a very divided and divisive climate surrounding sports. And there was also, I think the reason why I got 20 participants to commit to 2 interviews and an intervention was that there's a recognition for increased conversation and education around this topic. So people wanted to talk, they just weren't sure the safest spaces to have these conversations. The theme that emerged around the intervention, there were some shifts in perspective, not necessarily a ton of attitude changes, but perspectives did shift. Particularly folks that listened into the panel discussion developed more empathy and recognizing that this is a human issue and not just about winning or losing. And a lot of participants following the intervention really stress the need to see the full picture. So while there's not a ton of scientific or medical research out there about the impact of testosterone or individuals who transition after going through male-driven puberty, there was a strong desire to have conversation about testosterone and the impact that it has on athletic performance. And then the last theme that emerged was around team culture. And regardless of athletes' backgrounds or identities, support from head coaches is crucial, and the need to be prepared as well. So a few results that emerged, again, looking specifically at fairness. There were competing priorities between what's more important between fairness and inclusion. And when we talk about fairness, the conversation really focused on fairness for cisgender athletes. Nobody was really taking into account, well, what is fair for all athletes, which would include transgender athletes in there. And looking at the research and thinking about advantage, especially physical advantage, there's a difference between what do we deem acceptable forms of advantage and intolerable advantage. And when we talk specifically about transgender women, that is essentially associated as an intolerable form of advantage in sport, and why they're subjected to increased scrutiny and stigma. Another result, again, physiological differences, was often cited and talked about, and physiological advantage was scrutinized for transgender athletes far more harshly than cisgender athletes. When I asked participants about what are some characteristics about their most successful athletes, it was not necessarily driven by physiological athletic ability or height, weight, strength. So when we talk about trans athletes, we scrutinize those physiological differences far more harshly. Again, recognizing the one-sided nature of this issue and how polarizing it can be, there really is a need for middle ground, but it becomes increasingly difficult to find that middle ground because there's this battle between social science and biomedical science, when biomedical science is relatively remains inconclusive. Another result is a lot of participants talked about the need for increased conversation and education, but it often is not a priority. So one participant told me, I'm in the middle of my season. While this is really important to talk about and learn more, I have bigger fish to fry and my game plan for next week. So on one hand, participants told me that we need to talk about this more and coaches need to be better educated. But on another hand, very few had knowledge about policies or making the time as a department to prioritize these conversations. So some conclusions that were drawn, very similar to some things that I've previously shared. But one of the biggest things that emerged was attitudes are formulated from personal experience. And when you don't have personal experience with transgender people, you're kind of, you're not making an accurate, your perception is not 100% accurate because you're using your personal experience that doesn't involve the individual that we're talking about. And really looking at conflicting views about the importance of physical advantage in sports, and how that really is only an issue in terms of transgender athletes. And again, I mentioned that about men's sports being the standard, and sports is a very binary space. And so that kind of challenges the status quo a little bit of what transgender athletes don't really fit neatly into the women's sport box or the men's sport box. So it sort of disrupts beliefs and leads to some implicit bias. In terms of the interventions, the personal stories of trans athletes really, I think, made the biggest difference, increasing empathy. Statistics and facts matter for participants that were sort of on the fence about where they stood. When they got a better sense of the scope of participation, that helped to put things into perspective. And really, for some individuals that weren't entirely sure how they felt like by omitting information about testosterone can feel deceitful, or like the whole truth is not being presented, which actually turned participants off from the interventions when they felt like they were being lied to because there was not enough conversation about athletic performance and testosterone. And then just a snapshot about how coaches can create inclusive cultures through support for all athletes. Coaches can't just do this alone. The role of the athlete is really important as well. And student athletes need to take ownership of their team culture. And then understanding the lived experiences will help develop empathy, which also will have a positive impact on team culture. So kind of some overarching recommendations. The need to challenge and shift mental models is crucial. Again, the way we formulate our attitudes and perceptions based on previous experiences, we need to be able to kind of see things through different lenses, to be able to think about or change the way we think about fairness and debunk some stereotypes that exist around gender in sports for that are deeply rooted. Creating safer spaces to learn is really important. Individuals want and organizations want to seek out opportunities to learn, but don't really feel like it's safe. So administrators and educational leaders need to be able to provide purposeful training opportunities. And then kind of going along with that, being intentional on curriculum development that promotes challenging thoughts. And the goal should not be to change people's minds, but to provide them with some education and allow them to shift their opinions from there, and really focusing on facts versus over feelings. So I kind of flew through that. Dr. Rasmussen will tell you that I'm rather long-winded, so I apologize if I went over a little bit on my time, but would love to open it up to some questions if anybody has them.
Thank you, Dr. Steinman. That was a very, very interesting study. I appreciate your research. It's such a controversial topic, and I follow the swimmer at Penn, and just always checking in on articles and things that are surfacing about that athlete. So thank you so much for your research. It was really, really interesting. Do we have any questions? I have a question if you guys are still thinking. I guess, Dr. Steinman, can you share maybe what was one of some of the challenges that you faced doing this research study?
Well, I probably say the biggest challenge that I had to overcome was keeping my own opinions and biases in check, navigating through interviews. I was fortunate to have a very solid SP that kept me in check and helped me through that process of being a good researcher and making sure that my opinions, I have pretty strong opinions on the topic. So making sure that that doesn't come through while I'm conducting interviews. Because with such a controversial topic, building trust, I recognize is something that would be really crucial. And another way, if there's any students out there looking at qualitative research, I also used a researcher journal, and every single page ended up being full. So I use that both to manage my emotions and also to help record some nonverbal communication that I thought would be important that wouldn't come out in the transcript.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Dr. Betts.
Yeah, Sarah, you did a fabulous job. I was so excited. I've been following your research for several years from when you first started thinking about the topic, and you had just a rock star committee. So I'm so proud of your work. I'm curious to find out, like, what is next? I mean, the amount of time that you've put in, the detail on the coding, I'd love to hear, especially in light of everything that's happening politically across the United States, what you plan to do in terms of publishing and getting materials out there and really getting your name in the literature.
Yep, great question. Well, I enjoyed the summer. I really challenged myself to not to give myself the summer off and read for fun and not be immersed in work. So now that the summer is over, I'm currently working on putting together like a I guess, like a presentation that I can do some consulting work with coaches, athletic departments. So I'm building that out, and then going to start kind of pushing to see if I can find the opportunity to talk with coaches and administrators, because I think it's timely and important. But I want to publish some articles. So I'm kind of in the phase where I'm trying to figure out next steps and how to do that. And do I want to collaborate with researchers or look to take some of my research and run with it? So currently in the figuring out phase, but yes to all of it. Looking to find opportunities maybe at conferences to present. So I'm kind of over the last month or so really started to focus back in on what do I want to do with everything that I did over the last year.
Well, I look forward to following more of your research going forward.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I look forward to, everything you're going to do, and I wish you the best of luck. It sounds like a wonderful thing to try to pursue. So that's wonderful. Any other questions? Well, I just want to thank again our presenters and our guests and the faculty that attended the doctoral colloquium this evening. This is just an example of the wonderful research that our doctoral students are putting out and contributing to other research that's out there. And our students and our alumni have such important research that focuses on social issues and how education can make a huge difference. And I just want to thank you guys again for being here. I hope you can join us next month for our December Doctoral Student Colloquium. It will be on Monday, December 2nd at 7:30. And so we host the Doctoral Student Colloquiums every month. It's the first Monday of the month from 7:30 to 8:30. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for our presentations next month. And thank you so much, everyone, and have a great evening. Thanks for joining us.